Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're totally flipping the script on a word you probably use all the time, and that's utility. Now, usually when we say something has utility, we just mean it's handy or helpful, like a utility belt or a utility knife. But in the world of economics, it takes on a radically different, almost coldly objective meaning. And honestly, it completely changes how you look at why people buy what they buy.
So let's kick things off with a kind of bizarre question. What do a deadly cigarette, a gloomy rainy day, and a painfully sharp medical injection all have in common? On the surface, absolutely nothing, right? One is a terrible habit, one's just weather, and the last is something most of us actively run away from. But to an economist, the answer to this little paradox is that they all possess the exact same invisible economic property. And wrapping your head around what that property is, well, that's literally the key to understanding human behavior.
And that brings us to our core definition. In economics, utility is defined, very simply, as the capacity or want-satisfying power of a commodity. That's the whole shebang, nothing more, nothing less. You really have to let go of your everyday assumptions here. Because in this context, utility is completely detached from being practical, and it's entirely detached from bringing you joy. If a product has the power to satisfy a human want, literally any human want, no matter how bizarre or even harmful it is, bam, it has utility. All right, let's dive right into the first defining characteristic, its heavily subjective nature. Because utility exists just to satisfy a want, and let's face it, we humans all want wildly different things, utility differs heavily from person to person. It's not this inherent physical property of an object like its weight or its height. It depends entirely on the individual's own subjective estimate of how much satisfaction they expect to get out of it. Think about it like this. Picture a perfectly cooked plate of meat. Now, for a non-vegetarian, digging into that meal yields incredibly high utility. It satisfies a strong craving, provides nourishment. It's basically got massive want-satisfying power. But slide that exact same plate of food over to a strict vegetarian, and suddenly, it holds absolutely zero utility. The commodity itself hasn't changed at all. The food is chemically identical, but the utility just plummeted from high to zero, purely based on the mind of the consumer. But wait, it gets weirder. Not only is utility entirely subjective between different people, but, and this brings us to trait number 2, it's also highly relative for the exact same person. Utility is constantly changing with time and place. You really can't say a product always has utility for you, because your environment, your immediate needs, the context around you, they're always shifting. Let's use an umbrella as an example. During the pouring rainy season, having an umbrella provides massive, unquestionable utility. You desperately want it so you don't get soaked. But take that exact same umbrella, hand it to the exact same person, and drop them into the dead of a freezing, bone-dry winter. The umbrella's utility suddenly drops to zero. You don't want it, you don't need it, and honestly, carrying it around is just an annoyance. The object is identical, but the time and place have completely rewritten its utility. Now, before we hit the third trait, there's a pretty funny bit of historical irony worth mentioning. A lot of brilliant minds have wrestled with this concept over the years. The famous economist, Professor Alfred Marshall, back in his early analysis of demand, actually tried to assign hard numbers to utility. He unrealistically assumed what we call a cardinal measurement. Basically, he thought we could measure utility in specific countable units, kind of like measuring inches on a ruler or pounds on a scale. But, as we know today, and as our third trait officially defines, utility is fundamentally not measurable. You simply cannot objectively quantify it. And why is that? Well, like we've been saying, utility is an entirely psychological concept. It's happening invisibly, right inside the human mind. You can't just hook a physical meter up to someone's brain and measure exactly how many units of satisfaction they just got from eating an apple. We know the utility is there, for sure, and we know it drives their purchasing choices, but it completely defies any kind of objective physical measurement. So, because we're dealing with this purely psychological force, we run into trait 4, which is a real trip. Utility is totally different from usefulness. In a normal, everyday conversation, if we say something has high utility, we just naturally assume it's actually useful for us. But in economics, a commodity can satisfy a really strong want, giving it massive utility, while possessing absolutely zero actual benefit to the consumer. The classic example from the source material really hits the nail on the head here. Consider a person suffering from severe alcoholism, a drunkard. To that specific person, a bottle of liquor provides incredibly high utility. It has immense want-satisfying power for their immediate, intense cravings. But at the exact same time, that liquor has absolutely zero usefulness for their health. In fact, it's actively destroying it. High utility, zero usefulness. In the economic model, the health consequence doesn't magically erase the utility. Taking that cold, hard look at consumer behavior a step further brings us to trait 5. Utility is completely devoid of ethical connotations. The economic concept of utility doesn't have a moral compass. It has no ethical boundaries, and honestly, it doesn't even care about legality. Economics is just observing what people actually do, not what they should do. If a commodity satisfies any type of human want, whether society thinks that want is highly moral or deeply immoral, it has utility. End of story. This actually loops right back to that hook from the very beginning of The Explainer. This amoral lens is exactly why cigarettes have utility. To a regular smoker, a cigarette carries a very high level of utility because it satisfies their immediate want for nicotine. And this remains true despite the absolute fact that smoking is terribly bad for human health. The economic lens is perfectly impartial here. It doesn't judge the habit. It just acknowledges the demand. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, trait 6, which busts probably the biggest myth of the whole bunch. Utility is fundamentally different from pleasure. It's so easy to just assume that if you're satisfying a want, you must be having a good time, right? But economics recognizes that we humans frequently want things that are completely miserable to experience. Satisfying an urgent, critical want might not bring you a single ounce of joy. Say you're severely ill. You urgently, desperately want to be cured. Because of that, taking a horribly bitter medicine, or going back to our earlier example, getting a painful medical injection from a doctor, carries incredibly high utility. It has immense power to satisfy your want of getting better. But does it provide pleasure? Absolutely not. It's painful, it's unpleasant, it's super uncomfortable. High utility, zero pleasure. Getting what we need doesn't always mean enjoying the process. Okay, let's pull all of this together and look at the whole picture. If you ever need to map out the exact characteristics of economic utility, maybe you're studying for an exam, here are your 6 pillars. It is heavily subjective to the individual. It is relative to time and place. It is a psychological state that is impossible to direct and measure. It is entirely separate from actual healthy usefulness. It is a completely amoral concept with zero ethical filters. And finally, it is entirely different from the experience of pleasure. By adopting this really clinical lens, economists can strip away all our human idealism and actually predict real-world consumer behavior accurately. So I want to leave you with something to chew on today. Take a close look at your own life. Think about the random purchases you make. How do your own so-called unhealthy choices, or those painful necessities you end up paying for, still perfectly follow these strict, unforgiving rules of economic utility? The next time you buy something you know is bad for you, or dread paying for something you absolutely need, just remember, you're experiencing the fascinating, amoral reality of utility at work. Keep looking at the world through this objective lens, and I guarantee your daily choices are going to start looking a whole lot different.